So we bring in Morgan Hook now, a partner at Bluejacket Strategies. He's a Democratic consultant as well. As you can see, we have a map behind us. I have a laptop to maybe cycle through some maps. As we want to get a little bit deeper, as we know, there's a lot of barriers in the way that the state has to get to even begin to redraw. Yeah. But obviously, I'm sure some of these meetings that they're having, they have an idea of where and when they want to put different lines. So let's talk about it.
Sure.
Where would you start?
Well, I mean, we know that they know because they already drew maps that got tossed out just a few years ago. Right. So we know that it can be more partisan. And if you have no rules applied, you can really go crazy. I mean, the term gerrymander comes from a district that was drawn in Massachusetts that looked like a salamander, and the governor at the time was named Jerry, so they called it a gerrymander. I learned that history lesson before I came here. So
I did not know that.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah.
You can carve up districts, these crazy-looking little tails going this way, and when they do this stuff, they really do go district by district, even home by home, block by block, to figure out how can we pull in people. But again, I think the other point, though, is, and we'll definitely take a look at these maps, there are still rules. Even when you're gerrymandering a district, there are still rules about population proportionality, right, and making sure they're more or less the same size. So there are rules within just a naked partisan gerrymander, but there are smart people who know how to do this, who know how to carve up these maps.
Right, and the reason there's controversy around this is obviously, there's questions about, is this really democracy? And, there's the voting rights groups have big issues with it. That's all acknowledged here. But at the end of the day, if they're going to get their way, they're going to try and make sure that they're competing. As we talked before, sure, other states have been doing this for a long time, and yes, that's what Texas is actively and vocally trying to do now, yeah, at the direction of the president.
I mean, New York State has done this for a long time. On the state level, the New York State Senate was gerrymandered for 100 years. And a big reason why Republicans were able to keep a majority in the state Senate until the last, decade or so was in part because these districts were carved up. I remember at one point, and we're looking here at a congressional map, but the old Senate lines, if you looked at the city of Rochester, obviously the city of Rochester's got a lot of Democrats in it. Yeah. And it was like they cut it up like a piece of pie, so that they just took a sliver of Rochester and then they fanned it out into some of the more rural counties. And Rochester basically had no Democratic representation, even though, again, the purpose of these districts is, the idea of any district, any political district, voting district, is that the people are sort of like-minded, that they have like-minded interests. And so that's part of the huge problem of doing something from a good government point of view, right, from a democracy point of view.
Yeah.
If you have a district that winds its way from, downtown Albany deep into Delaware County, the interests of someone in downtown Albany they're both New Yorkers, of course, but if you're talking about rural Delaware County versus urban downtown city of Albany, and they're sharing a member of Congress, that is not someone who will be able to adequately represent the interests of those two very different people.
Right.
That's the theory behind it anyway, and probably mostly accurate. But sure, by the way, if you want to spread out your Democratic voters. So we're looking here at the current maps, right? Yeah. And you have X'd out the different districts where we have Republicans. So New York 23, New York 24, 21, that's Elise Stefanik's district, and 17, that's Mike Lawler.
Yeah, this is just upstate. We do have the New York City and the Long Island. We can get to that in a second if we have to. But this is just upstate right now.
So the issue of the issue is I don't think that there's a realistic way to divide up New York so that there are no Republican seats. So at some point you have to sort of say, we're just going to give all of that to a Republican. One of those places, frankly, is the North Country. And this is where you see Elise Stefanik's district. And it's basically the whole sort of, rooftop of New York. Plattsburgh has got some Democratic voters. Billy Jones, who just resigned, a Democratic assemblyman. He's the lone Democrat who has public office north of Saratoga. So there are some Democrats there. But taking that district and trying to figure out how to make it a Democratic district, nearly impossible.
You don't see, I wanted to ask you about that one, because you look more than 10 years ago now at least, they used to dip down deeper into, I think, even Albany
Yes.
County. And that's when there was a Democrat in office there.
Yes.
Right before Elise Stefanik. You don't see them even trying to go down deeper here?
No, I think the demographics have changed a little bit. And even that Democrat who did hold the seat before Elise Stefanik, he was able to win in part because it was a special election.
Yeah,
there
he was thrown into different right, yeah.
There were two Republicans running. So he
Yeah.
won his race with 46% of the vote, things like that.
Yeah.
A 50-50 contest where you're looking to get 50 plus 1, it's going to be really hard to figure out how to take that district. Similarly, in the southern part of upstate New York, so in the southwestern part, I mean, you could see a way where you see 26, which is the city of Buffalo.
Yep.
That's a ton of Democrats. That's
Yeah.
a very, very safe Democratic seat. I mean, you could see trying to divvy that up a little bit. Like, do you take more Democrats who are up in Niagara County? Do you move some of the Buffalo down into Chautauqua and Cattaraugus County? Maybe. But one of the things, again, if we're doing this purely like let's gerrymander this
Yeah.
to maximum benefit for the Democrats, what you don't want to do is create districts that are toss-ups in favor. Like if you're going to give up a couple of Republican districts and say, look, we're just not going to win that. That's probably the smarter thing to do than to have a district that's like a 52-48 voter enrollment advantage for Democrats, because that's basically a toss-up.
Right.
And then you're playing with fire. So you want to carve out as many districts as possible that are also going to be safe electorally in a good year or a bad year.
That's a good point you make, because that 26th Buffalo, that's Kennedy, Tim Kennedy, and he won that handily 65-34 in the last election. Then you have 23, that's Nick Langworthy right now, 65-34. So those are pretty big outcomes. And you mentioned the ones that are toss-ups, and you look at, I think I look at some of the borders here, right, of who's bordering who. And how that works. Like if you're trying to get 24, do you dip into 22? But that Mannion won that 52-48 in the last election. So like, how do you reconcile? How do you wrestle with? Okay, we need to get more Syracuse voters. It's a more Democratic blue city there, without impacting 22.
Well, I mean, to some degree, this map is already gerrymandered, right? Look at 19. 19, where they have gone into Ulster County, which is very, very blue. And they went all the way out to Ithaca, which is also very, very blue.
Yeah.
And so to
I
connect,
think it was 80-20.
I mean,
80-10.
to drive from Tompkins County to Columbia County, there's no real good road to do that, by the way. It'll probably take you 4 hours to make that drive. That's not, again, in the spirit of looking at curbs all the way up into Rensselaer County.
Yeah, and the big part of when they redrew the lines was dipping up into Rensselaer County, which Molinaro won, I think, by 6 points there, but it wasn't a huge, gain for him there, which, you get some of the voters that are kind of near Troy and Greenbush, things like that, right? Yeah,
and so to some extent, again, you're right. You could take, if you're trying to win, say, 24 here, although, again, 24 is this U-shaped district here where it goes all the way up into Jefferson County and Watertown and then all the way out to Niagara Falls. I mean, come on.
Yeah, right.
They've clearly, what they're trying to do there, even with this version of the map, is they're trying to figure out where are the Republican voters, and we're going to draw a circle around those and just let that be a Republican seat.
That's Claudia Tenney. She won 65-34, and as you mentioned, you could also maybe apply Buffalo to that, what you said with 23, with 25, maybe carving out some Rochester to dip into 24 a bit.
I mean, but again, so this is a political process, and the people who are in the room have outsized influence. So. Tim Kennedy, maybe less so Tim Kennedy because he's brand new, but Joe Morelli has now been in Congress for a decade or so. Yeah. Joe Morelli is not going to want to give away his voters. Joe Morelli wants to stay in Congress and wants to keep his district the way it is, which he can win year after year. So when they're going in and they're thinking about how they want to do this, the people who actually are in these seats right now are going to have a say in that, or at the very least going to be able to raise their voice and say, don't do this to me. I'm going to be really unhappy. You mentioned John Mannion. I'm sure he would like to pick up some voters to make his seat a little bit more comfortable.
Right.
He doesn't want to be giving them away to, say 24 or 23, so that somebody else could maybe win in a close election.
Right,
So,
and they carved out, so people know, Auburn in the last time they did it a couple of years ago as well, which was a big boost for him in a district that they flipped from Brandon Williams as well. And Auburn, I think people saw that as an opportunity for Democrats to flip that seat in the last election too.
yeah, I mean, again, the demographics of elections are mostly the same anywhere you go. Cities have Democrats, rural areas have Republicans. You've got 4 big cities across the middle of New York, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany. You've got some Democrats down in Binghamton, but it's a much smaller city. And then the rest of it is just not going to be a place where you're going to be able to pick up a lot of Democratic votes. Outside of some place, again, like the Hudson Valley is becoming more blue. Ulster County is very, very blue. But up north, outside of really, truly like the city of Plattsburgh, there are not a whole lot of Democrats up there.
Yeah.
So I don't think you might be able to make some small changes to a map like this, but I don't think a ton of changes are going to flip a whole lot of districts here. You're certainly not going to win all 4 of these. Maybe you can figure out a way to get 1 or 2 at best.
We didn't talk about 17 with Mike Lawler, who's been very outspoken against this, probably for a reason. You look at Westchester and the part of that county that's carved out. That's the only county that Mondaire Jones won in against Lawler in the last election. I'm wondering if maybe they try to get more of that involved to try and tip the scales there. I mean, at least that's a more, there's less space there. Maybe you can do a little bit more to work with.
You could definitely, and that's one where you're carving out even houses, city blocks, that kind of thing. And I'll also point out, I'll go a step further from what you just said about Mike Lawler. Mike Lawler really barely won that election. Yeah. And I will be very blunt in my assessment here. I don't think the Democrat was a very strong candidate. But the other thing that happened was that they came up with a person to run on the Working Family Party line. And this person actively did not campaign, was just basically like a ghost candidate. That person took 2% of the vote. And so I think Lawler ended up winning by 6. If you take that 2% and you give it to a true Working Family Party candidate, he's down to a 4-point win in a Trump year when everyone's talking about the whole state, shifting slightly more red. He barely won that district as it is. So the slightest tweaks that you can do to that, dipping into a little further south, which are going to be safe Democratic seats, it could have a very big difference come 2026.
So thinking maybe at best you can gerrymander 2 potentially if that's what you're looking for. In upstate.
I think realistically you and I don't know which of the districts up here how you're doing it up here, but I believe that there are people who are smarter than I and know these maps inside and out.
Yeah.
And so they could probably figure out, but I think 17, I don't think he's going to win re-election anyway, but gerrymander or not, I think that 17 goes Democratic in the next cycle. But yeah, you could definitely move some folks around in 17 and make that a much more comfortable race.
Let's get to the city next. 11's the only one, obviously, as you might imagine, that is a Republican in, and that's Maliotakis right now. And there's a part of Brooklyn in that. I don't know if you try and get more, because a lot of these are trounced by Democrats over Republicans.
I actually think this would be really easy. I think you could carve up Staten Island, and one of the rules with redistricting a congressional district is that it has to be continuous, right? They have to be connected. Right. Unless there's water. And so now water, because it's an island, you can say, we can connect it to Manhattan. We can connect it to Kings County. We can do anything you can do anything you want. You could divide Staten Island up into 3 different separate districts and, bring 10, 9, and 8 down in there and just take a chunk of Staten Island out on each one of them. Give 10 a little bit more of Manhattan, and whatever you want to do. Yeah. I guarantee you, this one, if they want to really mess with the maps, you could make this a very comfortable Democratic seat.
Okay, let's go quickly to Long Island here. I think some of this is interesting, and you have some similar dynamics that you have upstate with, you have the 3 with Tom Suozzi. That was obviously it was a Republican before the special election. A close win for him. I don't know how much you can get from 1 or 2 there in Nassau County specifically.
Yeah, I think 1 would be difficult. Coming way out into the island here, this is this big long district that goes all the way out to the end. And again, the size of the district just means that there are many fewer people there, right? But I am certainly not an expert on Long Island and the voters there. But I would have to think you could figure out a way to move things around down here. And again, this is just butting up against the city here, where you've just got an infinite number of Democrats that you can just pass out to other districts as needed. I think that the other thing, because you just mentioned Tom Suozzi, I do think that the other thing that needs to be mentioned here is like even if you do all of this gerrymandering, and even if you hypothetically, what did we just say, 2 districts in upstate, Staten Island, and let's say 1 on Long Island. So let's call it 4 districts. You do that in New York, you're going to make some of those districts more competitive. Like they're not all going to be layups in an election. Some of them are going to have voter enrollments that are going to favor Democrats, but not so overwhelmingly that it's a shoo-in every time. And as we have seen over the last few years, and I think we will continue to see, there are going to be election years that are going to be favorable for Republicans, and there are going to be election years that are going to be favorable for Democrats. And some of these districts that they mess around, if they mess around with these lines, some of them are going to go to Republicans in future years because they're not going to be able to. There are only so many voters, and there are rules to these things. You can't make every single district impervious to a red or a blue wave.
I think that people have been passing around Massachusetts as a state's been able to master that. I mean, New England, of course, but I think that's an interesting example of how they have been able to do that. New York, with its dynamics, a little bit more different.
I think New York is so I lived in Massachusetts. I lived both in Boston and in Western Massachusetts. I'm familiar with the state. There aren't that many Republicans there. They're like, I don't know that you could get all of the Republicans together in Massachusetts and make even 1 congressional district. Just pick their houses.
Yeah, and it's funny because they had a Republican governor, Charlie Baker, for a long time.
That's a whole other. We could have a whole other discussion about that and why I think the tactics for Republicans running in New York for governor are so bad. But anyway, New York is a very different state. New York is. I know that New York is. The state has a reputation as being very liberal, very much a blue state. It's always going to go to a Democrat in a presidential election. But the thing is, as we know, living upstate, New York City has got millions and millions of people in it, and it's a heavily Democratic, and that just that pulls the whole state towards Democrats. Yeah. But like we were just looking at with this map, the 1st district, there's a lot of Republicans out there. Yeah. You go to upstate New York, there is a lot of Republicans. Outside of downstate, outside of New York City, this is a 50-50 map, maybe at best for Democrats, right? Like this is not Massachusetts. There are a lot more people, even just upstate, take out New York City. There are more people in upstate New York than there are in all of Massachusetts. I think that's true. Yeah. Someone have to fact check me there.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah.
So this is much more, like Midwest almost, if you look at upstate New York. So I think it's a different, just to do a comparison between a state like Massachusetts and New York. I know they're very proximate and they're very blue when it comes to presidential politics, but again, if as you've spent any time in upstate New York, you know that this is not purely a deep blue state when you start to drive around in some of these counties. And
right. Well, you look at the county executives. Yeah. I think everyone but 2 or 3 are Republicans. Right. So I think that tells the story of, especially when you go down to the local government level, of what it looks like.
For sure.
Right. At the end of the day.
And I think, and I also frankly think that a lot of the there's an old-fashioned term called a Rockefeller Republican that is a New York term. I mean, there is, I think, still remains a breed of Republican in upstate New York and in New York in general that is not strictly a Donald Trump Republican. That is a more moderate, in the George Pataki mold Republican. I think that still exists in a lot of places in upstate New York. And when voters are given more of a choice like that, and by the way, rural Democrats are not, they're not AOC down in New York City. Like John Mannion is not AOC.
Right. Yeah.
So
neither is Kathy Hochul.
Neither is Kathy Hochul, and she's from Buffalo. So I mean, I do think that the demographics, especially outside of New York City, are very, very different than most of the other states in the Northeast. It's New York City that just it changes the whole. When you're looking at it from a statewide perspective, New York City really changes what New York is.
One final thing about all of this is you look at after the Republicans get into power in 24, generally we see the trend flip back the other direction.
Yep.
And we talked about some of these closer races that were won by Democrats, the seats that flipped, right? And I think about 19 with Josh Riley, Mark Molinaro. That went days after the election. That was close in that aspect as well. Same thing with Mannion in 22. I mean, how much do you think a wave of Democratic voting will impact things like this? So you talk about holding seats. How much do you think that will be a weight here when it comes to all this?
So what we've seen over the last decade or so, certainly since COVID and probably since Donald Trump became president the first time, is there are big swings back and forth. It's every 2 years feels like it's going to be a wave year. There is an anti-incumbent fervor that exists in whoever is in power. We want to get them out of power. I know that the narrative, we've talked about this before. I know the narrative coming out of 2024 is that New York shifted red, but outside, and again, Kamala Harris still won the state by a lot.
Yeah.
So maybe it shifted red in some senses, but in another sense, Democrats picked up congressional seats. They held serve in the Senate. They held serve in the Assembly for the most part. So outside of some marginal numbers in an overall voting statewide, Democrats actually improved their standing in New York State in 2024. And now I believe that in 2026, we're talking about, and I don't mean this in a partisan way, just very factually, if you look at the poll numbers, we have a historically unpopular president right now, even by his own standards. And he is dictating the political conversation in every one of these seats that we're talking about, whether they're gerrymandered or not. The conversation is going to be about Donald Trump. And in New York State, based on polling, based on every opinion piece we see, and a lot can change between now and 2026 with all those caveats, based on what we see right now, it is going to be a very bad year for Republicans in 2026 because if he is the topic of conversation and if he is the thing that people are thinking about when they go to vote, they're going to vote against him. Or Republicans are going to stay home because they're not happy.
One other aspect of that is the governor.
Yes.
Does that happen? I know Trump is one thing when you go down the ballot. How about the person who's running for governor, who also, to be fair, does not also have great favorability ratings either?
That is true. Her favorability ratings are substantially higher than Donald Trump's. And frankly, in a historical context, her favorability is in the high 40s.
Yeah.
That's usually pretty good for an incumbent, really in any state. Like there are some states where governors are pretty popular, including, by the way, some of the most popular governors we've had in the last few years are Republican governors in Democratic states. Again, another topic.
Yeah.
But I actually think her standing is quite strong. And again, I think for the same reasons that they'll do, Congressional Democratic candidates will do well. I think Kathy Hochul will do well. I think the other thing is in all likelihood, she's going to be running against Elise Stefanik, who has done everything she can to identify herself and to wrap herself around Donald Trump.
Yeah.
As an electoral strategy, I don't really get it. He's not popular. The things that he does aren't popular. His policies aren't popular. Good luck to you. I just don't think it's going to turn out well for her.
All right, we'll see how the process goes, of course. That's the underlying elephant in the room beyond all this of when this could actually happen. But Morgan, we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.